In the time of the Buddha, it was common for religious people to go door to door in their community asking for donations. So Buddhists, with their begging bowl, would go from one house to another and ask for any leftover food that people were willing to donate in order to sustain them. In this way, they were able to live out their vow of poverty and focus all of their energy not on earning a living, but instead on realizing enlightenment to save themselves and others from suffering. Unfortunately, times have changed quite a bit from the time of the Buddha 2,600 years ago. Especially here in the West, if we were to go door to door asking for food donations, well, frankly, we'd probably get a ticket for soliciting at best, and at worst, we'd be thrown in jail for trespassing. Not to mention the fact that food alone would not be enough to sustain us. We would also need money to buy shelter, clothing, etc. The fact is, for most Buddhists in the West, we must have jobs. We must earn a living, and we must use our money to buy things like food, clothing, and shelter. Now, we may fall into the trap of thinking that because we have to work a job, we're unable to realize enlightenment. But this could not be further from the truth. The Buddha, in his infinite wisdom and compassion, foresaw that this might happen, so he made allowances for lay people so that they could earn a job, earn money, and still be in keeping with Buddhist doctrine, still be on the path to enlightenment. We simply need to ensure that we earn money and spend money in a way that's in keeping with our Buddhist training. The first part of this is called right livelihood. Right livelihood, simply put, means that we earn money in a way that does not cause harm to ourselves or others. Now, there's a lot of wiggle room here. However, there are 5 professions which the Buddha says are so damaging to ourselves, to others, to our communities, that we as Buddhists must avoid them altogether. And these professions, these 5 forbidden professions for the Buddhist, are as follows. We must not sell weapons. We must not sell poisons. We must not sell intoxicants. We must not be involved in the slave trade, and we must not be involved in animal butchery. As long as we avoid these 5 forbidden professions, we are practicing right livelihood. Now, once we're earning money in a way that's in keeping with Buddhist doctrine, the question becomes, well, what do we do with it? And to answer this question, we can look at a passage from the Upasaka precepts. An Upasaka being a layperson who is walking the Buddhist path. And the text goes as follows. If the answer is yes, he should then say, "Good son." After taking the Upasaka precepts, one should at first pursue secular studies. After learning them, one can seek wealth properly. If one earns wealth, one should divide it into 4 parts. One part should be offered to one's parents, oneself, one's wife, and one's relatives. 2 parts should be invested, and the last part should be saved for future use. Can you do these 4 things? If the answer is yes, he should then say, "Good son, wealth should not be entrusted at 4 places. Places of old people, distant places, places of bad people, and places of powerful people. One should not leave one's wealth at these 4 places. Can you avoid them?" Now, the passage is fairly straightforward, but we'll go by it line by line because there are a few places that are a little confusing. In the first half, the Buddha is simply telling us that we should use our money to care for ourselves and our family. Filial piety, or family devotion, is very important in Buddhism. So we care for ourselves, we care for our family, and this way we end suffering for ourselves and others. He's also saying that we should invest a portion of our money, so using it in ways where we can make more money from it. Maybe it's buying tools for our job. Maybe it's investing it in stocks and bonds that are in keeping with Buddhist doctrine. More on that later. He also says we should put a portion of it in savings for a later day. So, nothing too crazy there. Now, in the next part, he's warning us about places we should not store or keep our money. The first is places of old people, and I had to do some digging in order to make some sense of this one. But there's some historical and cultural context which makes this make sense. In the Buddhist time, there were no banks, so it was common for people to store their money with relatives for safety or to bury it in graveyards. The idea that people don't like to go to graveyards, so it should be safe. However, if we keep our money with our old relatives and robbers break in, well, we're putting our relatives in danger. So he's telling us not to put our money in places with elderly people where they might be at risk. He's also warning us to not bury our money in cemeteries because then we're having to disturb graves and there's a lot of bad karma that comes with that. He also warns us to not keep our money in distant places, so ensuring that it's in a place we can keep an eye on it, either in a bank or if it's invested in stocks and bonds, that we know where the money is being placed, we know what our returns are, just basically ensuring that we're informed. He also tells us to not put our money with bad people. So remember the 5 forbidden professions I mentioned earlier? Well, he's telling us that it's not enough for us to avoid those professions. We also must not try to make money off of those professions as well. So in the same way that we should not sell weapons, we should not invest in businesses that sell weapons. And finally, the Buddha tells us that we should not store our money in places of powerful people. So we should not use our money to buy wealth and status with politicians, for example, because once we do that, we are enthralled to those politicians. And there's just, again, a lot of negative karma that's associated with that. So if we do those things, if we earn money in a way that's in keeping with Buddhist doctrine, and we spend money in accordance with the items I just mentioned, there is no problem with the Buddhists having a job or having wealth. The key is that we use wealth in a way that ends suffering for ourselves and others. Amitabha.